Hi everyone, this is the lecture to accompany Chapter 1 in your textbook. Please carefully read Chapter 1. There's a lot of information, including some very good examples that I simply don't have time to address in this lecture. Okay, let's talk about small groups at the heart of society. You'll notice as you read through the text that each chapter begins with a story that exemplifies and illustrates the concepts discussed in that chapter. This first chapter begins by telling the story of the Best Friends Animal Society. It's a real society. It was founded in the 1960s. It's still going strong today, thanks to the dedication not only of its founding members, but others who have joined over the past half century. This organization started with a small, dedicated group of people and has never lost sight of its goal to treat all animals with love and respect, as stated in the Golden Rule. The Best Friends Animal Society illustrates what people can accomplish when they work together as a group. They are a group of volunteers. You may indeed belong to at least one group like that. Generally, though, most of the groups you will belong to over the course of your life will not be voluntary. But the work of a group is often very important, not just to accomplish a goal, but to help the individuals within that group grow and develop. Your family was your first group. And even though you may not have thought of it as group work, that's what it was, and through it you determined who you are. But you've been a member of lots of other groups, and will be for the rest of your life, like school or social groups, class group projects, sororities, fraternities, service projects, spiritual or religious groups, or even something like a book club. In fact, much of our work time is spent in groups. Maybe you're a union member, a member of a management group, or a part of a work group project. In fact, the higher up you go in an organization, the more group work you will do. You might think of yourself as a loner, that you can solve problems all by yourself. Well, that might be true in certain circumstances, and we're going to discuss those. However, there are many problems and issues that you will encounter in which you will need to work with other people to solve them and to implement those solutions. In times past, only high-status individuals were even allowed to make decisions, and everyone else's job was to make sure those decisions were carried out. But in our democratic society, we are all responsible for working together to get things done. So it's a good idea to learn how to best work together in groups. Group members need to understand that their group must effectively perform two key functions. The task function, which is obviously to understand and work towards the task or the goal, and the relational function, which is to manage the interpersonal relationships within the group so that the task can be completed. So how do members of a group accomplish those functions? Through effective communication. That's why this class is taught by me, a communication professor. Small group members need to learn and apply the principles of effective communication in order to have the best chance of success in groups. So let's look at what criteria determine whether an individual is better at solving a problem and when working in a group to solve it is more effective. The first thing to consider is how complex is this problem? If it's likely that one person doesn't have the time to gather all the relevant information about the problem, it's better left to a group of people to handle it. If, however, there is one person with expertise on the topic who has a very good grasp of all aspects of the problem, and there's a single potential solution to that problem, then an individual might be better at solving it. Which leads to another consideration, that not only is the problem complex, but there may be several potentially good solutions to the problem, and the goal is to determine which solution will work best. A group is far better at determining that than a single individual. And if the end goal is to make sure that whatever entity the group is working for accepts their solution as the best one, then it's critical that they have carefully looked at all of the solutions. Of course, because of group dynamics and logistics, a group needs to have enough time to accomplish their task. If, however, there isn't enough time and conditions are changing rapidly, one person may be the best choice to come up with a solution. Also, if a group comes to an impasse and for some reason can't continue to work together, an individual may have to step up and do the work. That's a last resort, of course, but it does happen. And if you've ever been a member of a group that just falls apart due to poor communication or lack of commitment, you know just how bad groups can get. We certainly don't want that to happen in this class. That's why you're here. So what exactly is a small group? Well, a group in general needs to have 3 or more people. One person can't be a group no matter how many voices they have in their head. 2 people still isn't a group. That's known as a dyad, D-Y-A-D. It's not a group until there's a minimum of 3 people. And not just any 3 people standing around make a group. Those people need to have a common purpose or a task. They have to interact with and influence each other, and they have to be interdependent. Now, the term interdependent, which we'll talk a lot about, means that all people in that group depend on each other to help the task get completed. And what one person does within that group affects all the other people in the group. The term small group means that, of course, there are at least 3 people, but not so many people that the individuals in that group aren't able to interact with and perceive each other as individuals. While different books and different experts in group communication may have different ideas about the maximum number of people in a small group, for purposes of what we do in this class, we consider a small group to be between 3 and 7 members. This class starts out with a maximum of 25 students in it, and it's likely that a few of those students will drop the class during the semester. So we will probably end up with 4 groups of 4, 5, or 6 people in them. Some groups may have more people than others, but you can certainly accomplish the group's goals if you have less people in your group due to attrition than some other group. The textbook uses the terms groups and teams interchangeably, but some experts argue that groups and teams are a bit different, that teams are more highly structured and groups less so, like, say, a sports team versus a work group. Regardless, the same principles of effective communication apply. Communication is defined as the process by which people create, interpret, and negotiate shared meaning. In other words, getting messages across to each other in ways that can be understood. Small group communication, then, is the communication that occurs within that group, and that can be both verbal, the words and language used to create the messages, and nonverbal, which is everything else that we do over and above the words to get the meaning across. Before this class, you may have also taken a public speaking class, which involves an individual speaking to an audience, or maybe even an interpersonal communication class, which is concerned with the ways in which 2 people, dyads, interact with each other. You'll be using those skills when you have a conversation with another member of your group or when you deliver your portion of the group's presentations. However, this class is concerned mostly with the more complex transactional nature of how groups communicate with each other when they're working together, and how to do that most effectively so that the end result, which is the group presentation, meets or exceeds their expectations. This is a hybrid class, and much of the work that you'll be doing within your groups is accomplished online. This is pretty much in line with what is happening out in the real world. Most groups use technology to communicate with other group members when they can't meet in person. You probably won't be using teleconferencing or Skype, but you will likely be using things like email or texting to talk to each other. And once your permanent groups are assigned, those groups will each have their own Canvas page, and through that page you can share documents, send messages, and add to discussion boards. Mediated forms of communication like this are great, but you have to remember that they're a bit different than face-to-face communication. The lack of nonverbal cues that add meaning and context to messages can lead to misunderstandings, so be aware of that. You might have to explain yourself in more depth or give some context to the message to help others understand exactly what you mean. How any individual small group functions has a lot to do with its general purpose. People form groups to address different human needs, so let's look at these needs. First, people form groups to get and give love and affection. We all need to be cared for and about, and we need to be able to express those emotions. Another reason is for personal growth and self-awareness. We need to be able to learn about ourselves and to be supported by others while we do it. A third reason is to interact with people who have interests that are similar to ours, to share our excitement and knowledge about those things, and to learn more about them. And of course, we join groups to get things done, things that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to accomplish alone. Psychologist Will Schutz has proposed that 3 major needs motivate human interaction. Inclusion, or the need to belong, is a very powerful motivating factor in joining groups. We want to feel as if we're a part of something. The second need is openness, or the willingness to be open to other people, to reveal ourselves to them, and to be known and cared about by them. And finally, control. People feel the need to have some level of control over their lives and their environment. They want to feel competent, to have mastery over something. They want to feel as if they can make a difference in the world. So groups are categorized according to these needs, which is the main need that they have to fulfill. The 2 main types of groups are primary and secondary groups. Primary groups form to meet inclusion and openness needs. Your family, as I said before, is your first and most important primary group. The whole purpose of a family is to meet those needs. Love, caring, affection, avoiding loneliness, sharing yourself with someone else. Your social circles, the groups of friends you've cultivated during your life, those are also primary groups. You like those people, they care about you, you share things with them, and you open yourself up to them, and that's their main purpose. Secondary groups have different main goals. They're generally deliberately formed to fix things, and in doing so, they meet our need for control. They're how we make a difference in the world at large and establish ourselves as a worthwhile member of society. We do it in conjunction with other people. So things like work groups, task forces, quality control circles, those are things that would qualify as secondary groups. However, no group is purely primary or secondary. They fall somewhere along a continuum. Figure 1.1 in your textbook illustrates this. Certainly a family can solve problems, which is one of the purposes of a secondary group, and just as certainly a work group can help meet your inclusion and openness needs, which are the purposes of a primary group. This class is concerned largely with secondary groups, so let's look at the different types of secondary groups. Support groups are a specific type of secondary group. They're designed to help people understand and work through a particular problem that they have as an individual. Usually, the members in a group like this all have the same kind of problem, things like substance abuse, anger management issues, or particular medical diagnosis or problems. The purpose is to support each other, to learn from each other, to be able to cope with the problem and either solve it or learn to live more effectively in spite of it. Learning groups are another kind of secondary group. They're concerned mostly with helping people understand and control information and events in their lives. This class is a large learning group, and each of your small groups will be a learning group, at least in part, as you learn how to research, organize, and make presentations about topics. Sometimes universities put new students into what's called a cohort, and those students take all the same classes together, study together, and pretty much stay together throughout their college career. New doctors are often put into learning groups during their hospital residencies. Learning groups can be a very effective way for people to learn and practice new skills. Finally, organizational groups. These are the groups that you will very likely participate in during your career, whatever that's going to be. There are different kinds of organizational groups. Committees are groups formed by organizations to deal with specific issues. They can be a standing or a permanent committee that serves a particular purpose that always needs to be addressed, like a membership committee or a finance committee. The people on the committee might change, but the committee is always in existence. If, however, the issue is not permanent, then an ad hoc committee might be formed to take on a single assignment. The end result of that committee might be a presentation or a report outlining solutions to a problem. Once the committee has achieved its goal, it's disbanded and goes out of existence. Another name for an ad hoc committee is a task force, and if you've ever heard that term before, now you know what that means. Another type of organizational group is a quality control circle. These are groups of employees who usually voluntarily tackle issues that affect job performance, like safety or productivity or morale. They can be very effective at enhancing worker engagement and communication as long as employee participation is embraced by management and the solutions provided by the groups are appreciated and implemented. Then there are self-managed work teams or autonomous work groups. This is a fairly new concept that's been embraced by some big companies, including Zappos, which recently cut out all of its middle management and went to this kind of work structure. Some employees love it, some don't, and would rather have the hierarchical structure typical of big business. These work teams are fairly autonomous. In other words, the team isn't closely managed or supervised. They work together as a group to decide how they will accomplish their task. Of course, they have to follow certain guidelines, but are generally left alone. As long as they meet their goals, it's fine. As long as all the team members are skilled and committed, this type of group tends to work very well. Now it's time to address a very important aspect of groups in general, and this class in particular, ethics. Ethics are the standards and rules that we use to judge appropriate behavior. Ethics are particularly important in this class because of the interdependent nature of groups. Everything you do and say in the group affects everyone else in the group. While the vast majority of students in my classes have been very ethical in their groups, there are occasionally people who think the rules don't apply to them. So I've seen instances of slacking off and expecting to get credit for it, bullying, insensitivity, and just believing that you're somehow superior to your other group members. So what are the kinds of behavior I expect from you in your groups? First, you must be willing to communicate with other group members. If you just sit there and refuse to take part in discussions, you're not contributing. This doesn't mean you have to talk incessantly. An important part of communicating is listening carefully and attempting to understand. Don't ignore the dialogue going on in a meeting while you check your Instagram feed. Second, you must be respectful of the other group members and take the position that they have as much right as you do to their ideas and opinions. Disagreement is completely normal. It's how you handle it that determines whether you're ethical or not. Third, group members need to use good critical thinking skills. You need to evaluate information in a thorough and unbiased way. You should seek only the best information, present it clearly, and discuss it with the other group members to make sure it's correct and clear. Good problem solving lies in finding the best, most reliable information. And finally, you need to be committed to your group, not just to the task at hand, but to the group as a whole. You need to place the good of the group above your own individual goals. So you want everyone in the group to succeed in this class, even though your main goal is for you to succeed in the class. Unless you're committed to the group, your goal of success in this class won't happen. Starting now and for the rest of the semester, and frankly in any groups you may find yourself a member of for the rest of your life, you will become what's called a participant observer. So what is a participant observer? It's a group member who does two things simultaneously, participates as normal in the group, but also observes the way the group interacts, communicates, and works together, and tries to adapt their group behavior to make the group work as effectively as possible. So while you're doing the work necessary for whatever your job in the group is, you'll also be looking at the group from an outsider's perspective. Pay attention to the processes of small group communication that you see happening in your group. As you learn more about group dynamics, you can use that knowledge to help the group become better and more effective communicators. This is the end of the lecture to accompany Chapter 1.